Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 211 of Humanity Rising. I greet you today with, I would say, a heavy heart. I'm feeling quite delicate, as most people are here in the United States in the aftermath of yet one more mass shooting. This one in Boulder, Colorado, as many of you have seen on the news, where again, a young man, 21 years old, with access to weapons freely and without any due diligence or background checks or anything, bought the necessary weaponry, walked into a local supermarket, and within minutes, 10 people were dead, and he was apprehended and now faces murder charges. This followed the previous week in Atlanta, Georgia, where again, a young man, only 20 years old, walked into three spas and laid waste 8 people, mostly Asian women, and was on his way to Florida to kill more people before he was apprehended. It's a deeply sad feeling to be in such a dysfunctional country, where the levels of violence, with more guns than there are people, the level of political hatred emanating out of the Republican Party and the Fox News and the alt-right, as Donald Trump continues to spread venom around the nation and stir the hatreds and the fears and the animosities day by day without restraint. So it's one of those days where deep grief and deep sorrow pervades my being. So I'm very thankful that we can gather together as we start our program today and just take a few deep breaths and close our eyes and place our attention on our hearts. And it's our hearts that encompasses all things. Every feeling that we can feel can be held in a coherent heart. So for the next minute or so, let us breathe together. Let us listen to our heartbeats together, and let us grieve the loss of life, but also the vitality of life in this very complex world of ours. Thank you, everyone. I take great comfort in the presence of humanity rising, knowing that there are thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of good people all over the world that are doing everything that they can in this time of existential ennui to bring truth, beauty, and goodness into the world. I embrace all of you, and with a heart now full of gratitude and deep thanksgiving for each and every one of you that have joined this session today, and for the impulse that generated humanity rising during this pandemic, when the whole world is under duress and all of us have to come together in community to quicken the human spirit in every way we can. And in our session today, we want to take the big view. We've been dealing over the last several days with many of the micro issues. We've looked at the issue of race. We've looked at the issue of the vaccines. We've looked at the issue of public health. And today we want to go wide. We want to return to a theme that we've been exploring since the beginning of Humanity Rising, and that is the new story that is being generated out of the latest findings in cosmology and physics, quantum mechanics, that is demonstrating incontrovertibly that we are in a cosmos that's completely interconnected. There's no way to tell where each and every one of us leave off and the cosmos begins. And in that interconnectivity, we're in a learning, vital, intelligent life process. Today we want to focus with a cosmologist who has explored the dimensionality of time. So I want to welcome Peter Mary, who's our Chief Innovation Officer and conducts on our UbiVerse and on our learning platform periodic Mary Musings. So Peter, welcome to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be here as ever. Very inspiring and uplifting in the context of everything that's breaking down and everything that's breaking through. So it's a real honor today to have Carl Johan Calleman with us. I came across Carl's work in the run-up to 2012, which, as you may remember, there was a lot of communication around the year itself and the Mayan calendar and all the different predictions and things. Was it going to be the end of the world? Was it going to be the birth of a new one? Was it going to be both at the same time? And you know, there was a lot of noise and a lot of what just didn't feel kind of right or grounded to me as I was browsing all the different content until I came across Carl's work. And it was the first bit of work that really seemed to make sense to me, because it took a longer view and it identified a pattern underneath the rhythms and cycles of our cosmos, and therefore of our Earth as a part of our cosmos, that Carl was able to illustrate in a very, very compelling way. It shows the fractal nature of our universe, how that these patterns of time show up at all different levels and dimensions of life, ties back into the wisdom traditions of the great cosmic web stories and the tree of life, and really, you know, really in a way brings a dose of humility to us as humanity, thinking, you know, as we often do, that we're in control of this whole journey and we can plan it all out. When you see these deep underlying cosmic patterns that flow through the microcosm of our lives. Carl, are you able to turn your video on and unmute yourself? Oh, Carl, you there? Oh, there we are.
There we are.
There we are. Good. Welcome to Humanity Rising. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good to see you again. It's been a while.
It has, like 10 years or so.
10 years or so, I think it is.
Yeah,
even though I did see your thesis, and that's about it.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the funny things, Carl, is you were doing all this work in the build up to 2012, and then 2012 happened, and I was kind of, I wonder what Carl's going to do now, because this was his whole thing. But it wasn't. That was the point.
Yeah.
The pattern continued.
Yeah.
And so I you know, great that you've continued on your quest. And it was just a recent thing I saw of yours where I thought, oh wow, Carl's really kind of on it again. It would be great to have him share his story with Humanity Rising.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe a good place to start is maybe just tell us a bit of your story of how you got into this. I mean, we've got like a good hour we can spend together.
Okay.
So there's no rush. So tell us the story of, you know, how you discovered this, and then we can get into some of the content, and also, of course, the implications that this has for us as we look to the future. And how we lead our lives.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a scientist by training, and when I was a graduate student in physical biology in Stockholm, there was a point, I was 29 years old then, when I decided to do a backpacking trip into Mexico and Guatemala. And, you know, I'd always been interested in history. And, you know, there's a bunch of different mysteries in history, but one of them is the fact that people in both the so-called old and the new world were building pyramids. And I assumed there was no contact between them. And yet, you know, that kind of which in a sense is a fairly far-fetched idea, you know, why put so much into that? But then, anyway, what sort of it implied was that somehow people in both continents really were under the influence of the same kind of forces or mindset or something like that, that there was some kind of a global mind at play that created this desire to build those particular structures. So that was sort of in the back of my head when I left for this backpacking trip in 1979 in the midst of my graduate students in a laboratory. And as it turned out, you know, I ended up in Mexico City, unbeknownst to myself, on the Day of the Dead. And that was quite a, what should I say, overwhelming experience, actually, especially if you're not expecting it. And anyway, I traveled around Mexico, and I did get to also to the land of the Maya down in the far south. And the whole thing really made some kind of a profound impression on me. I only briefly then learned about their calendar system, but I just felt that having been there then, this is the purpose of my life, most profoundly, so to speak. And then I continued, you know, my graduate students, and I started work then later at the School of Public Health at the University of Washington in Seattle, and did so for a certain long time. until a number of factors sort of gave my life a new direction, and I just felt compelled to explore the meaning of the Mayan calendar system. In other words, a meaning that would be scientifically meaningful, and a meaning that would be meaningful to modern people. And so I abandoned my previous career in biology and chemistry and started to devote myself full time to this. And of course, I was aware of the upcoming so-called end of the calendar. I placed it differently from most people, and for good reasons, I should say, that it was actually October 28, 2011. There was some kind of a hiatus or apex in the evolutionary processes. But I spent all that became my main occupation, teaching, having courses, writing a number of books that at this point have become 7 of them, just trying to make sense of the Mayan calendar system for a modern person. And there was I really didn't talk too much about what would happen after this shift in 2011. I did make some certain predictions, and they had been quite accurate, I should say, but I didn't at that point really feel confident in knowing what would happen in the calendar system after this. And it took me a little while to recompose my understanding of the calendar system, which really led to the insight that the calendar didn't end. The waves that are bringing consciousness to humanity are continuing into the future, and meaning that there's still something to learn, and that's you might say where I am right now with this. I have written 3 books in the recent 4 years, and so I'm here with you, Peter.
Great. Yeah. Well, how about you start by telling us, from in the discovery period before 2012, what is the Mayan calendar? What is it actually describing in your experience?
Yeah. Well, it's I think it was in many ways a sad story of how much uninformed ideas that were circulating around the Mayan calendar prior to 2012. What didn't come across really was the fact that the Mayan calendar system is something fundamentally different from other calendars on our planet. Fundamentally, it's a quantum system of measuring time or looking at time. And what that means is that unlike other calendars, unlike the Gregorian calendar or what have you, unlike the Muslim or Jewish calendar or any others, it's not based on the astronomical reality. And in other words, it's not based on in the Newtonian material reality that other calendars are. And that's a huge difference. It is, as I understand it, based on the evolution of consciousness, or actually it is the evolution of consciousness. And then if you have, if you share my view, some of them you probably do, that consciousness is something that is primary in the universe, then you will realize that everything material that has come into existence, like a human being, like myself, or anything like that, is really secondary to this evolution of consciousness.
Right. So
and
would it be accurate to say, I mean, the way I often think about it is it's like we've got a spectrum of information, essentially, and this is how the quantum scientists would describe it as well, and that there's a density of information at the center that we call matter, right? But then that spectrum expands into more subtle information or subtle energy that is carrying the information, and out of that, those information and energy fields, matter comes into form. That's literally information. So therefore, the way you describe the Mayan calendar would be saying it's not a calendar of the material gross world. It's a calendar describing the rhythms and patterns of time in the subtle energetic world that we would then relate to consciousness. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. It gives like an underlying pattern for underlying the dense reality. Yes, I agree with that.
And somebody asks in the chat, how does your work relate to Arguelles and Valum Votan? And is it to do with this point that Arguelles linked it more to the physical calendar, or?
Well, Arguelles, there's a lot to say about his story, so to speak. His initial book, then, the Mayan Factor, that came in 1987 and resulted, among other things, in the harmonic convergence of that year. His initial book was really a seminal book. He must be given credit for the fact that he opened up the idea that the Mayan calendar was different. Unfortunately, he then created a crazy calendar of his own, the so-called dream spell calendar that the Maya have never used. And it was really not following that his original insights, which was exactly as I said here, that it's a non-physical calendar. Instead, he developed a calendar based on the physical year of the earth and so forth. So, as I look upon Arguelles' legacy, it has some very brilliant beginning and unfortunately a very confusing continuation with this dream spell calendar that he developed afterwards.
Okay, good. Thanks for clarifying that. So that's a really great perspective for us to be holding, that on the one hand, we've got the calendar, the astronomical calendar, the kind of chronological calendar of the physical world, but that there's also a calendar in the world of subtle energy, information, and consciousness. Maybe it'd be a good point for you just to go into a little bit of the content. If you want to show any slides, that's fine. But just tell us a bit about that calendar. Like, what does it tell us about what's going on in those subtle informational realms, in the realms of consciousness, in terms of time?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of fundamental concepts that the Mayan calendar system are based on, and some of these concepts were really universally held by people in ancient times. One of them is the tree of life. When we talk about the Maya, we usually call it the world tree instead. And the other thing is the serpent, the cosmic serpent, you might say. And you find these kind of mythological concepts, as we tend to look upon them, all over the world. The only difference, and what makes the Maya so special, is the fact that they used numbers, calendrical numbers, to describe these mythological phenomena. And what these numbers mean is that we can make science, and it means that we can make predictions, or we can see how the numbers match with the reality as we know it has evolved, so to speak. And what this means, though, is that a good starting point to understand the Mayan calendar system is to talk a little bit about the tree of life and the serpent. Mm-hmm. Especially, the serpent may be of high relevance here. The serpent, as you know, is a concept that in many different cultures is like the main creator god. Take, for instance, the Aborigines in Australia that look upon the rainbow serpent as the great creator god. The oldest piece of art on our planet is actually a serpent that has been found in Botswana in southern Africa, 70,000 years old. And you have you have the biblical story, obviously, of both the tree of life and the serpent. And then in Mexico, all over the Mexico, you have the plumed or feathered serpent, as it's called. And nobody should think that these were sort of minor sideline deities or something like that. The reality is that what was once the largest pyramid in the world, the one in Cholula in Mexico, was dedicated to the plumed serpent. And I would think that quite a few listeners have visited the pyramid of the plumed serpent in Chichen Itza. It has a couple of million visitors per year. And that pyramid, that whole site was dedicated to the plumed serpent. And in the massive city of Teotihuacan outside of Mexico City, it is actually built around a temple they have dedicated to the plumed serpent. So this is not a minor thing. It is really the heart of the mythological world of the ancients. Now, what then is that serpent? It seems to be so ubiquitous. And the way I look upon it is simply that it's a sine wave. It describes the sine wave of consciousness. And if you think about it, if you have no computers or trigonometric tables or something like that, and you want to somehow symbolize a sine wave movement, well, the most natural choice to find in nature is actually a serpent. And it's also a life-bringing wave movement that you're talking about. So this kind of a plumed serpent is really a metaphor for a sine wave evolving consciousness. And these waves then, in the Mayan view, they originated in the center of the universe. And the center of the universe was the tree of life. And that's, it's then where is it, you may wonder, where is this tree of life? Which again is something that was totally universal in ancient times. If somebody knows some culture that did not revere the tree of life, I'd be happy to know about it. That's how universal it was. I haven't come across any culture that did not recognize that. And the Maya would portray the tree of life as a cross, really. A perpendicular cross would typically be there and shown in Palenque or other places like that. And the question then is, where is it? And there, modern science comes to our aid in a certain sense. It's been a while now, since 2004, essentially. What studies, the cosmologists, academic cosmologists, have been collaborating in order to understand how did a baby picture of the universe look like. And the way they went about that was to send out satellites, and there's now been 3 major such. The Kobe, the WMAP, and most recently the Planck satellite, in order to map the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is an afterglow of the Big Bang. And so the question was really then, was there any structure in this? In other words, this is a baby picture of the universe where you see as we can gather it, what it looked like as far back in time as we possibly can see. And one of the findings of this was not really consistent with the expectation, but it found that an axis was present in this material, and this axis has been present from the very birth of the universe. Originally, it came to be called jokingly by the scientific community the axis of evil. And the reason they thought it was evil was that this was not really consistent with Einstein's theories of general relativity or many other physical theories, so to speak. There was structure in the universe from the very beginning. Now they have sort of toned this down, and now it's this big axis have been verified in a sequence of different studies, and now it's referred to as the preferred axis of cosmology. But the point is, there is an axis in the universe, and we're not talking about our small little galaxy or something like that. We're talking about the entire cosmos. And so what I'm saying is simply that this axis that science now has discovered is really the tree of life, what the ancients talk about as a tree of life. And it's an axis that creates you might say, a yin-yang polarity of the cosmos. And this yin-yang polarity is then trickled down through the galaxy to the solar system, to the planet, and then eventually at the bottom of this ladder, the human mind is. And
can I share an image and just check with you whether this is it, what you were talking about?
Sure.
Is it this?
Yes, that's the picture of the cosmos. Yes.
Yeah, so there we have this kind of axis with the bulbs at the top and the bottom, right? This vertical axis, which also could be seen as a torus.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then we have across the center the material plane. So this is what they discovered: this kind of vertical axis, and then this kind of horizontal plane. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been verified a couple of times, and it immediately tells us that this universe is not a product of a sequence of random events, that there is a organizing principle at the very highest level of the universe. And but it's also if you go further, as the Maya did, and as I do, it's also something that we are in communication with, or we're actually downloading our minds from this axis.
So Carl, so on the one hand, we've got this kind of axis, this tree of life image that kind of sets up in a way a polarity within relative universe. We think you've got the absolute, which is just oneness, and we can't really say much about that because it's just oneness.
Yeah.
When we come into the relative world, it starts with a fundamental polarity, which we might say is the yin yang, fundamental polarity, which is then what gives birth to the relative world. So you've got that, and then you've got the sine wave serpent.
Yeah.
So how do these two kind of come together as in a calendar or something?
Yeah. So over time, emanating from this tree of life is a sinusoidal movement, and we are in resonance with these serpents, and we're downloading them, and meaning that we will download the kind of yin-yang polarities that the cosmos is emanating, or the cosmic center is emanating.
So and this fits the whole kind of fractal holographic universe.
Yes.
Idea where these patterns that are at their most fundamental right at the beginning of the universe permeate all different parts of the universe, all different parts of life, and come back as a pattern everywhere, basically, right?
Yes. So you could then here you have the plumed serpent in Chichen Itza, and you can see what leads you see the head of the serpent at the bottom left-hand corner, and you can see how a wave movement of 7 triangles of light is going into this. This photograph was taken on spring equinox, which is the only day when you can watch this kind of phenomenon. But really, that symbolizes that from the center of the universe, which is the house on the top of the pyramid, emanates these kind of waves, and they go down to the earth, but then we are in resonance with the earth, so we're downloading them. Mm-hmm. But the other part of this picture is the fact that the pyramids, most Mayan pyramids are built in 9 terraces like that. And what that means is that it looks upon these waves as quantum phenomena. Each level, you might say, is a state of consciousness, and to get from one state of consciousness to another, you have to make a quantum leap. Uh-huh. So what the ancient shaman kings of the Maya would do, they would climb these pyramids and perform ceremonies at the top of it. And that climb was really for them to enact the whole cosmic evolution scheme. Mm-hmm. They presumably, by coming up to the top, they attained the highest state of consciousness of the universe.
Okay, so just to clarify, so these are, what you're suggesting is these 9 waves that are reflected in the serpent and the 9 levels of the pyramid are reflecting 9 phases of development, of consciousness development, that permeate the whole universe at all different levels.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Right.
I hope you're going to tell us a bit more about the content of those 9.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Do you want me to continue with this kind of slides, or?
Yeah. I mean, if they help illustrate the story, the slides are very useful.
I think so. So this is just to say that other peoples would also have this kind of a quantum model. This is about, it's from Korea, it's contemporary with the pyramid in Mexico. And it's it's 9 octagons that are stacked upon each other, creating a kind of a stepwise quantum leaps of cosmic quantum leaps. Mm-hmm. And the tree of life in many different civilizations, it's ubiquitous, and this is the idea how the states, the quantum states, are dissipating from the cosmic center down to the human being. And what you see to the right there is that as part of those information that comes from the cosmic center, there is the detail of how we as human beings are in resonance with the earth. And there is a parallel then where the Western hemisphere corresponds to the left brain half, and the Eastern hemisphere corresponds to the right brain half. And so we're at the bottom of this. And here you can see a little bit, it's sort of beginning the whole discussion of what does that mean for us as human beings. And one of the conclusions, I think, is that there really isn't such a thing as human nature, as if that would be some kind of an eternal quality. You know, usually when you hear people talking about human nature, they will emphasize the egotistical aspects or something like that and say that's always been like that and so forth. It really hasn't. How we act as human beings is really a function of these different states of consciousness, and depending on which one we're primarily in resonance with, we will we will be different kind of beings. And so this starts the whole discussion of the 9 levels, the 9 waves, and the 4 bottom levels there, which are having the lowest frequency rhythms, they are about biological evolution. They create the human being as a biological species, and I'm not going to go into that here, but it's a very interesting topic by itself. But then you can see they're starting with the 5th wave, the pictone rhythm. There is the human being comes into existence as something more than just an animal. And this is, you know, that wave was activated 100,000 years ago. And what you can see then among these phases is that at that time, there was no veil, there was no shadow falling upon the perception of the human beings. And meaning that people then started to express themselves spiritually, symbolically, artistically, but very slowly. This is the pre-civilized human beings that was preparing for the arrival of civilization. And then you can see the second from the bottom is activated 3115 BC. And that's the starting point of what is referred to as the long count of the Maya. All their pyramids is dated in this particular calendar. There are many calendars in a system, you might say. But all the pyramids, everything from ancient times is dated in that, because they related to a particular starting point in the calendar in 3115 BC. And that changes what it is to be a human being completely. Not only can you see that it introduces a perpendicular geometry, and so people got a structured mind at this point in time. What they describe, the ancient Maya, is that from the cosmic center, from the tree of life, there it became visible a new geometry. And there are two aspects of this. This geometry that then was downloaded resulted in the fact that suddenly in a number of different places on our planet, notably in Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley, civilizations emerged. Civilizations capable of building pyramids, of building cities, of writing, of calendars, and many other things like that emerged. And this happened because people downloaded a new mind. The mind, the rational mind, as we talk about, it's not created by our brains. It's downloaded by our brains. And so this remarkably rapid change that we saw at that time in history, it came like a quantum leap. You know, people had previously been maybe doing some simple kind of agriculture and living in small little villages. And suddenly after that shift, or at that shift, Upper and Lower Egypt was unified. They started to build the huge pyramids, temples, and all these kind of things.
So Carl, what you're suggesting is that shift, the information needed for humanity to make that shift came from a cosmic holographic impulse, basically a pattern of information that emanated from the center of the universe, the tree of life.
Yes.
And that new frequency, as it were, downloads itself everywhere. And that was why humanity was able to make that quantum leap. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. But but there is also, based on my own values, at least, I would say there's also a shadow side of this shift, because the kind of yin-yang duality that people started to download as a result of this new geometry, it created a polarization of human life, of human society. See, what happens when we download one of these states of consciousness is that we start to perceive reality through that particular filter, and soon this state of consciousness becomes to us like the water is to the fish. It's like, this is reality. The reality is dualist, and this comes from the cosmic center, or from the gods, as the people that were living at the time were looking at it. And then they start to project this duality onto reality. And that's really the basis of all social stratification, you might say. So going from a society, or even lack of society, hunter-gathering groups that, or simple peasants that has been before, you create a society was created based on fundamental differences between one class of rulers and the slaves, or the simple peasants, and so forth. And so this duality is not only the birth of civilization, it's also the birth of a patriarchal society that has been dominating human life for about 5,000 years.
Yeah. Carl, can I just, one thing that suddenly jumped out at me here was, I've just been reading the book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess. I don't know if you know it,
Yeah.
quite an old book, and I was towards the end reading the section on the witch burnings, which were the kind of, in a way, the ultimate expression of the separation between us and the feminine and the earth. And do you know when the last witch burning was? 1756.
Okay, yeah.
Look, there you go. Like
There we go.
1755 is the next shift. Yeah.
That's a good, and it's a very good book. I mean, it's sort of a description, a very good description of of the polarity of the human mind, and how that created the pushing down of the woman or the goddess, and all that. What is lacking is just the explanation to this. Schlein doesn't really explain it. He just sort of observes it, and he thinks that writing is the driving force in creating this patriarchal society. But as I see it, writing is also a product of this new state of consciousness.
Yeah, so everything that he describes kind of starts to emerge with that, with the 3000, or was it 3000 BC kind of phase. So that's the fifth wave, with the emergence of the fifth wave.
Yeah, but it's a very good book, interesting book and it really demonstrates these things quite. And yes, so then on top of that, in 1755 is a shift, and as you can see, then it's like a veil is covering the entire face of the human being, meaning that people become not receptive anymore from the spiritual light, you might say. And what that resulted in was sort of a big downplaying of anything religious and spiritual. And instead, the shift was moved over to production, consumption, and all that we've seen with the industrial world that started. The Industrial Revolution started with this quantum state of consciousness that you have there on the seventh wave. The good side of that, though, is that this is not a dualist. It's not a dualist mind. And so what happens at that time, not only do the witch burnings end, as you just pointed out, but also, for instance, in the British Parliament, there were voices started to be raised against the slave trade, and the treatment of the mentally deceased was humanized. The criminal system was humanized, and all kinds of democracy, you might say, was getting a much bigger hearing in the American and the French revolutions, and et cetera, et cetera. So there is a big change in the human mind taking place around that mid 1700s. It's the Industrial Revolution, but also, the beginning of a process of increasing, upholding the values of democracy, and even peace becomes a topic. Sort of prior to that point in time, people didn't think peace was really a possibility. We may not have achieved it, but at least for quite some time, it's become an ideal that a lot of people will adhere to.
And so all of these phases and the dates you've got in there, they were in the original Mayan calendar.
Yeah. You find it if you, especially in Cuba, in Jaxchilan, there are these different levels, and they are dated to certain points in time. So these are times of activation of new states of consciousness, but they don't replace each other. They, as a pyramid, they build on each other. So step by step, they're added to each other as new potentials. Yeah. And the next level is the 8th wave, and there you can see it's actually the light is coming to the right brain half, and so when that's really what you might say the revival of spirituality in the recent decades is coming out of that. And since it's on the right brain half, this is not anymore a scriptural spirituality that we're having. It's experiential spirituality.
Oh, so you would say like in the 6th wave, where the light is on the left half of the brain, you had a more scripture-based spirituality, and now because the light is on the right half of the brain in the 8th wave, that makes it more experiential or intuitive form of spirituality. So not divided into different religions, but a kind of transcendent, cuts across all the different okay, that makes sense.
And then at the top, what became accessible in 2011, and that's certainly one of the major things that happened in that shift. You have a return to the state of unity, or a state of consciousness of unity. And I guess I also want to say that this is not deterministic. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's more like to say that at a certain point in time, say 3115 BC, a new state of consciousness becomes accessible. Mm. And it was downloaded in a number of places, but there was also a large part of the world where it wasn't downloaded. The conditions weren't at hand to create a civilization, in northern Scandinavia or something like that.
So when like you're talking about it as a quantum level, and at the subtle level, that when it's there, of course, we always only ever talk about probabilities, not determinism. So what you're saying is, in a way, that new frequency at the subtle level of consciousness creates a probability and a possibility for something to manifest, but there's no linear cause effect, like there's no deterministic approach to it.
Exactly. And it's not deterministic exactly, even if we do download it, how it turns out. So, for instance, you mentioned this alphabet versus the goddess. I think Schlein there points out the interesting differences between in China Taoism and Confucianism. So what happened at some point in time, actually, if we go to the very midpoint of this 6th wave, which was 550 BC, that was a time of intensification of this particular duality that you can see pictured here, how the human mind became left-right dichotomized. But then that didn't create just one philosophy in China, and I'm just using this as an example. It created two possibilities. You couldn't avoid the fact that the mind now became dominated by this kind of a polarity. But whereas the Confucianists, they would say that they would develop a moral system of what is right and wrong, which is typical of this kind of duality. The Taoists basically said, let's try to avoid this, going into this duality at all, this polarity. So I'm just saying that even if everyone was given the potential to access this duality, it wasn't immediately obvious that what you would make of it. You could either try to avoid the polarity, as the Taoists would do, and harmonize it somehow, or you could set up a system of this is good, this is bad, and then you sort of more engage with the duality and create a religion of it.
Oh, great. That's very useful. Carl, we've got about 20 minutes or so, and people are now getting impatient for what's next. Is there a 10th wave? So what happens next?
I don't think there is a 10th wave. I think at the current time, it's a very small minority of people that actually has access to the 9th wave. And I think the positive future of humanity is to deepen the access of this, and which is, it's not, again, some people started to feel around the shift in 2011 that something new became accessible, like a given, you might say. It's something that is given to humanity, these states of consciousness. They're given from the cosmic center. Whoever is there, call it God or the gods or the simulators or whatever. But I don't have any firm idea as to what is there, but there is a cosmic intelligence that I'm certain of, a creative intelligence, and that everything that has happened throughout the history of the universe is subject to this kind of a time plan. And of course, the bottom level of this pyramid, the first wave basically starts a little bit before the Big Bang. So this scheme of evolution actually covers the entire evolution of the universe. And I don't think there is a 10th wave. The reason is that if you look at these states of the human mind that are listed there, they are part of a pattern that is going from unity through separation and back to unity. And I don't think there is more unity than unity, so to speak. And that's really why I don't think there is a 10th. There are other reasons not to believe that there is a 10th wave.
So, Carl, could this be a way to explain what you were just saying? So imagine that, the picture you've got there, which is one side of the pyramid, if we would just fill it up with the other side. Yeah. This is a kind of, imagine it as like a river or a stream, and that at the first wave, you've got more volume of water because more people have had access to that level of consciousness, right? And then as you go along, the stream or the river gets thinner because less people have had access to those, further levels of consciousness, let's say. And that what you're suggesting is that now that the basic pathway or the basic river has been laid down and there is access to all of them, now it's just a question of more water starting to flow through the river and a broadening of the banks. So an increasing number of people download these possibilities as they move through these phases of development. Would that fit?
I would say so. It's they all have a it takes some time until it's say, for instance, the 3115, the 6th wave that creates civilization. Humans create civilizations by downloading that mind. Initially, it was just a few different cultures in the world that downloaded that and actually created civilizations. But then over the time of this 5,000 years, more and more cultures and parts of the world have started to access it. And today, for instance, there is no part of the world where there is no writing. In other words, civilization in that sense, as well as, the civilization in the sense of cities, it's also become spread all over. So it takes a certain time for anything to develop through these different waves. And in the case of the 9th wave, which is the highest wave here, then it's only been active for 10 years. And And also, it does require, I think, to have some kind of a intention in order to get to it. It's not something that happens automatically. And it's in the nature of a quantum state that you don't get to a new higher level by doing more of the same of what you've already done before. There is something new. You have to do the quantum leap to a completely different state to get, and only then can you actually start to access this. So, you know, if people have been, say, stuck in some old-time religion, just going on in along the same track, you might say, they may never, you know, do the quantum leap, because they may even idealize to adhere to some kind of tradition that they believe is true, because
Oops. Oh, Carl, you are there? No, we just lost him for a minute. I was about to say that we, about a week ago, we had a session on spiral dynamics. Some of you may remember.
It's a tradition. Quantum leaps means quantum leaps.
Yeah. Carl, you're breaking up a little bit now.
Yes.
Yeah, you're just breaking up a little bit now.
Why don't we get out of screen share and
yeah, maybe if you stop sharing the screen now, that might help. If you can hear us. Yeah, there we go. But I was just saying that we had a session about a week. Oh, we lost him completely now. Hopefully he will. Hopefully he'll jump back in.
Here he comes.
Oh, there you are, Carl. There we go. I was just saying, Carl, when you dropped off, that a week ago we had a session on spiral dynamics. That, you know, that maps really well to those phases in terms of a development of consciousness where each level builds on the previous one, and where the emergence of each happens more quickly than at a previous time as well. So, but there's been a few people have been asking how Atlantis and Lemuria fit into this story. Have you thought about that? You're muted, by the way. You're muted. Rick, can you pin Carl again?
Oh, here we go. Yeah. Well, you know, I, as a scientist, I wouldn't base anything on things that are unproven, and I consider Atlantis and Lemuria as unproven things. I don't believe that they existed, except, you know, there is now an increasing focus of groups of archaeologists that think that what has been called Atlantis was actually a city around Cadiz in southern Spain. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But that wouldn't be anything 10 or 15,000 years old. It would be something that's less than 5,000 years old.
Mm-hmm. So you were saying you've written since 2012, and you know the way and the Mayan calendar story that you were sharing. You've written 3 books. So what are you writing and thinking about now? If you say the story doesn't continue in the sense that the calendar in a way is complete with the 9 levels, that there's not a next level. What is it that you're continue? What are you interested in now? What's the edge for you, and what are you sharing with people?
Yeah. Okay. I can. Let's see if I can go through. Okay. So these are my last 3 books. The Global Mind and the Rise of Civilization is really about how this new mind created civilization, that quantum state that went from a more floating, chaotic mind to the structure of the mind that created civilization. And then the other book is the 9 Waves of Creation, which is an overview of the 9 waves and how that has all the effects that has had. And then recently I wrote The Quantum Science of Psychedelics. That's my most recent book. And really what that is about is it's an explanation as to how psychedelics work, why they bring a new kind of world of experience into yourself, why they are healing. And the simple answer really is that they interact with this interface between mind and brain in such a way that this structured mind of the 6th wave that we talked about, that structured mind is disengaged. And as that happens, we become, what becomes accessible to us is the totality of these different frequencies that the 9 waves are offering to us. And that puts us in a new state of consciousness. So that's what that book is about. I have a new book in my mind, you might say, and which would be about what is consciousness. I mean, these books, they describe how consciousness evolves, but what is it? And the heart of the matter. And really then also going back to the time before the Big Bang, which scientists are now increasingly taking an interest in. Was there something before? And yes, I say the wave of consciousness, the first wave of consciousness, it actually began before the Big Bang. And it's to address, something that one of the biggest findings, I would say, of the 20th century science was the finding that the universe is fine-tuned for life. All the constants of nature seems to be perfectly adapted to creating life, and they couldn't be any different what they are. And how could that be then? Well, that's really something you can explain, but it requires an explanation, the fact that suddenly a universe comes into existence on a material level where 100 or so different constants of nature have exactly the values that they need to have. So something must have created this fine-tuning. And what I'm suggesting is that that's what I talk about here as the plumed serpent. The consciousness predates the material reality. And so that's something I'm having in the back of my mind right now as an interesting avenue to pursue.
Carl, in the chat, Michael makes an interesting point where he says, of course, the serpent is supremely important in the Amazonian peoples via psychedelics, as explained by Jeremy Narby.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah, so that would connect up those points.
Yeah. The great anaconda is like a deity among the Amazonian people that created the human beings. And that's what I'm saying as well. The 4th wave here created the human beings. It actually did that. But of course, you shouldn't believe that it's an actual snake, so to speak. It's just a life-giving wave, a sine wave.
Right. And another different Michael says, would there be a possibility of a cyclical pattern to these stages, similar to the yugas, which go in cycles rather than just ascending to unity? Do you see kind of a cyclical aspect to it?
Oh, of course, this is okay. Maybe I didn't make that clear enough. Let me. So let me. Well, say here, for instance, this is the seventh wave, all of these different waves. And, you know, whenever there is a new peak beginning, there is a new phenomenon emerging. And this here we're talking about the seventh wave, the one with brought industrialization, activated in 1755. And then you can see how leading up to our own time, there's been peaks and valleys. And whenever there's a peak, there is something new coming into existence. When there is a valley, there is some kind of destruction, or there is some kind of a resting. And, you know, it just shows that step by step, the dance music increased its frequency, you know, and you can see that when jazz music began exactly at the fifth peak, rock and roll at the sixth peak, and then the one with the highest frequency started in 1992 with the seventh peak. And you can go through everything and find that they follow these kind of, you can call it cyclical. I don't like the word cyclical. I say wave-like. And the reason is that cyclical would imply, you know, astrologers talk about cyclical things, meaning that it implies that things are just returning, endlessly, identically repeated. And that's not really the case. You can say this is a wave-like movement where every new pulse, every new peak deepens the expression of a particular aspect of consciousness that a particular wave is bringing into existence.
So what we're seeing here really is 9 waves again, but this time as a fractal within one of the bigger 9 waves, right?
Right.
Yeah, I get it. A couple of other comments here. Somebody asks, do you know if it maps to the known changes in brain volume of the human over human evolution? Have you looked at that at all? Yeah,
you can say so. You know, the fourth wave is the wave that brings the human being into existence step by step. And that started about 2 million years ago. And at that point in time, we have the emergence of the first human beings. Human being then is defined as someone who not only uses tools, which a lot of animals will do, but actually makes tools. So you have evidence going back 2 million years ago to people making tools. And that was a species of humans called Homo habilis. And that was the beginning of peak by peak evolving human varieties, Homo erectus, Homo antecessor, archaic Homo sapiens, and eventually with the 7th peak ending up in our own species, the Homo sapiens. And as part of that progression, there's been a 3-time increase in the brain volumes of human beings. You know, it makes a little bit of a sense, even though I'm not going into detail here, that here we do have this. These are geometries. You know, each of the different quantum states is characterized by a geometry. And which is really typical of quantum theory. It's not just energy. It's more important even that a quantum state is defined by a geometry. And you might say that the development of the human brain and its volume, that's really part of that geometric evolution that characterizes the fourth wave, as you can see here.
Great. Well, Carl, we're going to have to wrap up in a minute, but before we go, just what do you see as being the, people having heard this, if they've read your books and things, what are the implications of it for how us as individuals can lead our lives going into the future? Does it change anything, do you think? Does it suggest anything to us in terms of how we approach the time that we're in and the time that we have?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly. Now, we as individuals are products of an interference pattern of all of these waves, basically. And that means that each one of us is somewhat of a little bit complicated result of this interference pattern. Some aspects of it are, I think, evident in what is happening in the world. One is that the sixth wave has gone into a valley, and it did that in 2011. And meaning that especially Western civilization and the leading Western powers are on its way out, so to speak. The Western dominance is on the way out. And that's part of what the plumed serpent is bringing. And that changes the world, especially, I would say, most markedly, I should say, in countries like the UK and the US, which have been, in the previous time, they were the dominating winners of the peak, you might say. The West was winning, and it's, you can understand from this that the left-right dichotomy is actually a function of the West-East dichotomy on the planetary level. And this creates a completely new world, you might say, and it's easy to see in the United States how a division is created between those that want to sort of keep in the old dominator mode, when the West and you might say white European originating civilization was dominating the world, and that's now come to an end. And it really won't work to try to retain that dominance, because you don't argue with a plumed serpent. It's just there.
That's a great way to finish it.
Yeah, well, not finish it, but the other thing I like to say is just to encourage people to develop resonance with the ninth wave. And there are a couple of ways of doing it. One is to simply start following the ninth wave and see where it, how your own life responds to it, and cultivating those aspects that are generated by the peaks. The other thing is to my colleague Patricia Albert. She has developed something called Evolutionary Collective, where they practice the ninth wave, and they they emphasize that this is not an individual thing. It's not just a part of our individual evolution. I think that's a very important thing. It's a mutual awakening. It's mutually accessing together with others this state of consciousness, rather than unfortunately, what is happening very much in the world today is that the eighth wave that brought the digitalization and has that kind of also has a duality mind. It creates separation, and some people will not realize that can never be the end result of the cosmic plan.
Oh, I'm just losing you again, Carl. That may be a good place to stop. Yeah, don't argue with the plumed serpent. Serpent. Don't argue with the plumed serpent, and don't argue with a low bandwidth. We're going to hand back to Jim. I will follow up. I think it was somebody asked, could Carl put all, Tiffany asked, could Carl put all his slides in Humanity Rising? I will ask him. Oh, you're back. Great. Well, we're just going to finish up, Carl. Some people have, you've given us some tantalizing glimpses of some of your other slides. People have asked, would you be willing to share that presentation? We can put it in the group on the UbiVerse of people who watched this presentation. Yeah?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't. I don't think I'll share that. No.
Okay. So people can go back and watch the video and see the different slides if they want to. That's the best way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, thanks for being with us. It's been a very insightful and a great refresher for me, and to hear also how you're seeing the future and the next steps. But yeah, people have been very, very positive in the chat. So
good.
Thank you. Us on Humanity Rising. Yeah. And handing back to you, Jim.
Thank you. And thank you, Carl. This has indeed been very tantalizing. And I think it's another way of saying that the conventional worldview, like the conventional physics, the conventional scientific model, the conventional economic model, our conventional political models, are essentially the equivalents to believing that the earth is flat. And if we just take that in, that we're in the midst of a Copernican revolution in every aspect of what humanity's inherited story has been, we open ourselves up to a new way of looking at the world, and in this case, time, that you've shared with us today, cosmology, economics, culture, in ways that are essential for us to preserve humanity at this critical time and ensure the survival of our kind as the world keeps spinning and new waves keep coming in. And the one point, Carl, that of everything that you said today, and I wrote it down, that our rational minds are not in our brain, they're downloaded by our brain. And I just want everyone to just pause around that single thought. We think our emotions are inside us somehow, and that consciousness and our rational mind or our irrational mind are somehow epiphenomena of our brains. But just consider what Carl has said, that our brains download our rational mind. If you're a poet or you're a musician, consider that that genius is not coming out of you, it's coming through you from the outside in. that we are just receptors for solar energies, for planetary alignments, for astral positionings, and that our receptivity or not to frequencies and flows and currents that are coursing through our bodies like photons, billions and billions of them every single second. That is what largely constitutes who and what we are. And so, Carl, thank you for just opening our minds. It's not about whether you agree on all the particular points that Carl has said, because there's great room for debate and discussion and further exploration, but it's more that you open your mind to all these possibilities and allow the possibilities to rework what you think you know into that which you do not know, so that you can be inspired with the novelty that is seeking to lead all of us into a higher state of consciousness. So Carl, and once again, Peter, wonderful discussion. Thank you all. And then tomorrow, we're going to turn our attention once again to public health. And in this final session that's being convened by the Nordic Health Alliance and the European Health Future Forum, we're going to be looking at the issue of mental health and longevity. So that's tomorrow on Humanity Rising, same time, same station. Because of all the daylight savings time confusion over the last couple of weeks, key off of 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time in the western part of the United States, because we changed our clocks first. And I have to say, of all the crazy things that humanity has done to itself, I think daylight savings time has to be among the weirdest things we've ever consensed to do. But anyway, there you have it. Humanity still rises. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.